Past guests warned us about the rise of the right in Europe. They told us it would happen if Europe continues with their economic policies. Well, it turns out they were correct. Here to help us understand the rise of Europe's far right and why it happened, Liz Fekete is author of Europe's Fault Lines, Racism and the Rise of the Right. Welcome to This Is Hell, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the program.
Liz is director of the Institute of Race Relations. You can find out more about that organization by going to irr.org.uk. She has worked there for over 30 years. She heads its European research program and is advisory editor to its journal, Race and Class. Now, Liz, the first time we had the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, on our show was almost 3 years exactly to the day in January of 2015. Yanis feared that there would be a rise of the far right 3 years ago. How much has the far right advanced in Europe in the last 3 years?
That's a question that needs breaking down, because I think I would understand the far right as different from the extreme right and the anti-immigration movements. We've had new formations of extreme right parties developing really since the 1990s. So we've got the old far right parties like the Front National in France, but we've got sort of anti-immigration movements which come from a sort of slightly different place. They're not sort of neo-Nazis. The far right parties, I would say, differentiate themselves from those extreme right electoral parties in the sense that they're quite anti-establishment, they're quite anti the election process. So paradoxically, as these extreme right and anti-immigration parties have moved into government, the far right as an extra parliamentary force has increased in its influence. Over the last 3 years, I would suggest that is a right breaking of that particular progression.
The most recent time Yanis was on our show, this is back in November, he mentioned that austerity is what leads to the rise of the right. He pointed out that the post-World War I German right didn't rise during reparations imposed by the Allies that led to massive inflation, unemployment, and economic decline. But austerity, as it wasn't until austerity policies were put in place that the right rose to power. How much does austerity fuel the far right? And I'm sorry about using the term far right, and I know that we should be a little bit more careful in the way that we're saying this, but considering Yanis's home country of Greece is now imposing even more new austerity policy measures, to what degree do you think that increases the fortunes of the far right in Greece?
Well, I mean, in Greece, you have a situation. Golden Dawn is a far-right party. It's not one of these new formations. It is a far-right party that did extremely well in the electoral process, despite actually openly advocating violence. So I completely understand where Varoufakis was coming from on that point. I think I would see it as slightly different, because I would agree that austerity has been an enabler, definitely an enabler of the far right. But I would actually say that there are other forces as well. There are legacies of racism and authoritarianism in our European countries. UK, I come from the UK, we're a former colonial power. That is a factor in the rise of our far-right parties. They are extremely nationalist. They think that we should, it's a good idea. The empire was wonderful, and we should sort of go back and ruling the world and telling everybody what to do if we ever actually stopped, if you see what I mean. So, yes, I think austerity is breaking the bonds of society, but I also think we need to be careful, because not everybody who is poor and has been affected and impacted by austerity is choosing to vote for far-right anti-extreme parties. You have equally in Europe some really positive things happening in terms of new social movements, progressive parties. We've seen the rise of Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. So there's also an element where people who are directly impacted by austerity are choosing progressive solutions. But of course, austerity is causing heaps of misery. We've had the biggest spending cuts in Britain since, after the Second World War. So, since the 1930s, in fact. So you can't sort of downplay that, can you?
No, you can't. And it just makes me think, how much do conservative economic policies lead to conservative social beliefs, social understandings? Do conservative economic policies create social conservatism?
Well, it's a really strange situation, and I'm sure it's not so different from the US, because the prevailing ideology within the, let's say, the more mainstream conservative tradition in Europe is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is quite in favour of the global economy and the global market, embraces all those things, and very, very superficially, it embraces multiculturalism, because, sort of, globalization loves to sort of, present itself as, progressive on women's rights, even on gay rights, on minority rights. So in fact, what we're seeing, I think, in Europe is a split within conservatism. You're split between the global capitalists, if you like, and the national capitalists. So what we're seeing is the re-emergence, something that never went away, of these extreme socially conservative and Christian democratic parties, which were always on the fringe of embracing very extreme right and authoritarian solutions. If you look at Greece and Spain and Italy and all those countries, the mainstream conservative parties quite often evolved from the pre-fascist parties. Maybe they call themselves post-fascist. So what we are seeing, exactly what you're saying, is within that contest within the conservative forces as to who has ascendancy, within that contest between the globalists and the nationalists. The nationalists are coming to the fore, and they're saying we want more patriotism, we want more authoritarianism, we want these sort of uppity minorities to either assimilate or shut up, we're not going to have cultural diversity, a woman's place is in the home, all that stuff. So the globalists are faced with a real challenge. They're a real challenge, and one of the things that I argue in the book is that I think that rather than seeing this as just a sort of battle between these two forces, but we have to look at the way this is going to resolve itself. And what I perceive is happening is that it is resolving itself by the globalists actually realizing that they have to package neoliberalism up in a more patriotic and authoritarian wrapper.